Ta tara tara ta tara ta ta tara tara ta tara ta ta tara tara ta tara ta ta tara tara ta tara ta. Saluditos mis queridos merlinianos, esto es un poco de todo con Merlin Lemur. Yo soy Merlin Lemur, así que bienvenidos a mi canal. En el día de hoy quiero presentarles una conferencia que se dio en el Centro Ceremonial Indígena de Tibes por el arqueólogo Sean Sullivan, espero haberlo mencionado bien, que es presidente del Consejo de Investigaciones Antropológicas. Así que sin más preámbulos, vamos a la conferencia.
Bien. Voy a hablar en inglés porque en inglés es mucho mejor que en español. I'm going to be speaking in English, much better than in Spanish. There's a fair amount of material to cover to understand how we get to the conclusion. We have arrived at some conclusions in recent days. So I would encourage you to say your questions unless they're really urgent. Hopefully we can find a chair for that question.
Mr. Sullivan, can you please talk into the microphone just a little bit more? Sorry, it's hard. Okay, thank
I'm
you.
trying to balance how I do that and manipulate the slides at the same time. Does this work reasonably well? Okay. And if I fade out, shout. This is a discussion of Tibes archaeoastronomy and a celestial calendar here supporting social scheduling. I'm Sean Sullivan. Arqueoastronomy is the study of astronomical practices by people in past cultures based upon physical remains, artifacts to include community layout and astronomical alignments and tools. This analysis is supported by ethnographic information from cultural descendants of the culture we are studying and related cultures that live today. Star, sun, planets rise and set in repeated, predictable patterns. Remember, no electricity, no lights at night. You're out watching the sky virtually every night. Sun, stars, and planets rise and set along the local horizon in a repeated, predictable annual pattern of 365 plus days. The moon's monthly cycle of waxing and waning repeats, but its movement is more complex. It changes monthly and multi-year, but together they provide a natural calendar which all cultures follow to some degree, including our own. Key astronomical events are the solstices, which is the period when the sun reaches and pauses at its extremes in the north, the summer, circa 21 June, in the south, the winter, solstice circa 21 December. Equinoxes are transient events. The day and night lights are the same circa 21 March. This year, yesterday, is circa 21 September. Zenith passage in the northern tropics, which is where we are the days on which the moving sun, moving north toward the summer equinox, is directly overhead. That's important for indigenous cultures because that's when God is looking directly at you. The full moon, new moon are on a 29.5 day cycle. The lowest elevation annually of the full moon occurs around the time of the summer solstice. I'll tell you that for future reference. Looking at the slide, the display above, from south to north, the winter solstice, coming north to the middle, the equinox, then before you get farther north, as far as the summer solstice, you reach zenith passage. Get to summer solstice, and you go back the other direction, and you get to see the passage in, the pattern of the moon, years below. The planets move in the plane of the ecliptic. It's the rotation plane of the sun. They appear to transit the background pattern of stars from east to west. And when they go down in a cascade. And some of you will have watched that in recent weeks when the planets were closely aligned and they said one right after the other in a similar position. The ethnographic record that we use pertains as follows. The people of Tibes, we're talking about a period of 1112 under Tibes, were pre-Taino, and they were very likely to have spoken a dialect of Arawak, which is a huge language family. We know from the Spanish Chronicles of their contact with the Arawak speaking Taino, and from ethnographic studies of surviving Arawak peoples in South America, something of their astronomy. Rabiola Hara, utilizing a wide range of ethnographic studies of recent and surviving Arawak-speaking populations in South America, distilled their shared vision of astronomical practices, and he concluded that those cultural practices, which are shared today, reflect a common knowledge base stemming from the original dispersion of Arawak cultures circa 3,000 years ago. The people of Tibes therefore inherited knowledge of astronomy based upon cultural experience spanning centuries or millennia. The astronomical practices of Arawak diaspora, meaning those Arawaks surviving into the modern Europe, scattered around South America. Observation of celestial bodies as they appear on the horizon or at zenith passage, moving straight up. Those observations are made from a selected point in the village. Emphasis added here. Combined observation of the solar cycle with coincident rising and setting positions of the stars and moon are recorded, and they observe the solstices and equinoxes. We're going to look at a couple of archaeological sites to set the stage for the selection of Tibes for this study. One is the Taino site Moral de los Indios in the Dominican Republic. That feature, which is circular, is over 200 meters across, and has a centrally placed stone, which is a point for making astronomical observations, including the solstices. The central stone at that site is shown here. This is a topographic map of the main plaza area at Taino site in the Caicos Islands, called MC6. In the center you see a stone-lined court, and in the center of that there is a central stone. That central stone is offset a little bit to the east. That becomes important. That's a picture of the central stone on the left. There's a circular depression in it, which may have been the case of a pole. A pole that casts a shadow, and that kind of device is known as a gnomon. It's known as the arch on a sundial. This is the point from which the astronomical observations were made, and they included summer solstice, winter solstice, spring equinox, and observation of the Southern Cross. This is a contemporary site to Tibes, 900 to 1100 AD, culturally unrelated in many senses, because this is in North America by St. Louis. This is Woodhenge in Cahokia, Illinois. A couple hundred meters across the circuit, a vertical pole used for astronomical observations with a central pole. Their analysis of this site focused on the pole as an aligning device. We're looking at the other poles and aligning with the emergence of celestial bodies. I point out the shadow of that pole, which you can see goes to a temple mound at the point shadow, basic function of a gnome, a shadow. Tibes is a ceremonial center. What that is an archaeological site with large public spaces with limited on-site resident population. Public works at Tibes included plazas or ATH, built principally around 1100 to 1200. As a ceremonial center, it was a focal point for interaction by a regional population that sometimes converged on the site for shared events. A ceremonial center, which this site is part of a cultural interaction sphere that involves occasional assembly of people within the linked culture area. Many gatherings were scheduled in advance. A celestial calendar assisted in scheduling. If we can look at receipts for people that came in while we proceed, that would be good. Because this is long talk. Okay? Tibes has a number of public works involved in plazas. This is an aerial shot of some of those principal plazas. We focused for our study on number 6 in that display. That's the Plaza Principal. We focused on it because of the size, the complexity, and the work that went into it, and because it has a central stone offset to the east, which was the case for the Astronomical Observatory in North America at Cahokia, which was the case for MC6, the Taylor site, in the terms of Taylor site. We chose that as a point to take observations of azimuths to astronomical alignments. Okay? What's wrong there? I can go right. Also notable from the Plaza Principal is a pair of stone artifacts which are regionally unique. They're termed the star stones. There's a display of them up there. We also have a display on that table we'll talk about later. Okay, we refer to them as star stones. We have examined these artifacts in the context of their role in astronomical observations. We'll conclude the discussion with a focus on the star stones. That's the 2016 survey team. Luis, you said something yesterday about taking a picture of you for future reference. And so I thought, well, I'll use this one for past reference. I can't choose the next one. Among the alignments that we had documented, set up with a transit on top of the central stones, were sunrise and Zenith passage, which coincided with Sun and Venus emergence, which is throughout the airline diaspora, an important occurrence. It occurs every 8 years. Venus and the Sun merge visually. We also have correspondence with Venus rising on March 21st, which happens occasionally. In other words, at the equinox, Venus appears just below the horizon on the equinox on an 8-year pattern. And, I'm not showing you one of these lines, about 90-92 degrees sunrise with the spring and fall equinoxes. That line crosses a petrograph, lift and eastern wall, which we'll talk about. There is also an orientation during the winter solstice rising position of the sun through the southeastern gateway of the plaza. The setting position of Beta Crucis in the Southern Cross occurs through the gate in the southwest of the plaza on the summer solstice. That is the Southern Cross. Before I mentioned Alpha Crucis, which is the focus of one of the orientations at the Taylor site MC6. At this site, the focus seems to be upon Beta Crucis. But that's the formation, that's how the cross. There's not a big difference between the two. On the west side of the plaza, there is a pavement along the floor of the plaza. Through that pavement set, all the planets, the cascade of planets that I mentioned before, comes down into the west in the span of that plaza. It's also shown through the moon as it sets. In that pavement, there is a petroglyph, which is in the position of the sunset in the summer in the equinox. It also aligns with the central stone, and they align with the petroglyph that I mentioned in the eastern wall. And if you go northwest, 296 degrees through the northwest gate of the plaza, you have the same position of the sun and summer solstice. The result of that is that it is clear that the plaza was established with reference to astronomical alignments, with those in mind, and that central stone was the point from which those observations were made. In 2016, we conducted an experiment with an image of the star stone in which we made the assumption that the split line down the middle ran north-south, and we looked at the alignments of shadows of that pole, the full length of the shadow. Some interesting results with limited correlations noted. We have a new interpretation of the star stones. We believe it is an astronomical device. It was used with a vertical pole through the center of the pole, a gnomon, a shadow casting pole. And that the split in the stones goes east-west, because a gnomon marks east-west at the equinox, which it did yesterday, here. The star stones had a prominent and probably deliberate burial site together face down in the Plaza Principal. They are unique objects, carefully cut and carved, and were evidently of high cultural value. They have distinctive features that we started to discuss, which include a shared central hole, a straight line dividing the stones, splitting the shared hole, and they have surface etchings, including some unique markings on each side, and mirrored reciprocal arcs. We'll talk about that in a minute. They are similar but different, the two stones. Now take a look at the diagram on the left. Now take a look at the stone on the right. The diagram on the left is the path, the tip of the shadow of a gnome, shadow pole, at the equator, at the equinox. You have a straight east-west line. That east-west line corresponds to the split of the star stone. You have two arcs opposing each other, north and south. You see the arcs in the image on the stone. They are part of what is called a hyperbolic curve, and the shadow of the tip of the gnomon forms that when a celestial object, a light, sweeps across it, changing its altitude. The gnomon shadow tip pattern at the equinox, as mentioned, traces a straight line east and west. Because Tibes is north of the equator, that east-west line forms north of the center, because the sun is to the south and the shadow is cast north. This is sunrise yesterday, the equinox, and we're looking at the representation of the star stones, gnomon in the middle. So the shadow cast by the rising sun, and where the arrow points is the alignment with that petroglyph in the eastern wall of the plaza. Yesterday, we set this up, oriented it in the main plaza, established it over the central stone, and the tip of the gnomon, which you can see, the shadow, below traced an east-west line across that coincided with one of the jagged lines on the right, which we think was described there to record the equinox. Let's take a look at the angles formed by the light of some of the key astronomical events. Summer solstice on the left, zenith passage straight up, equinox and winter solstice heading south. If we use this to represent how it encounters the top of the gnomon, that's the gnomon right there, it casts predictable shadow patterns based upon the angle at which it arrives. There are mathematical formulas that will tell you if you have one of the angles in the right triangle, which you'll see. By the way, the blue line at the bottom represents star stones, north and south. The gray lines represent the pattern of the shadow cast by the celestial objects above. You can do the math and you can figure out if you correspond the degree readings on the left, the winter solstice, equinox, zenith passage, summer solstice, full moon, you get a gnomon that's just over 14 inches tall. Except for zenith passage. You don't need the gnomon then because there's no shadow. It's directly overhead. If you pull the gnomon, you have a hole. Yes, you do. Because there's a hole in the stone. And if you put a plumb bob on a string on the edge of that hole at noon on the summer at zenith passage, a beam of light passes through the hole directly down. This is a critical moment for Arawakhan culture. As I mentioned before, it's when one of the gods is looking directly at you and your village. And that moment happens spot specific. You go 50 miles in any direction. It doesn't happen at the same time. All right. We have mapped these angles and these shadows, and they correspond with the distribution of markings on the surface of the star system. We're going to pause a moment and do a little demonstration. Okay, Luis? One, I want you to go north, so we're going to go this way. Okay? There's the corresponding with the other. The angle of that light is approximately 48 degrees. That's the winter solstice. And as it moves in an arc across the sky, the tip of the nose forms an arc that appears a shadow tip on the stone that corresponds with the line etched on the stone. That stone is used as a marker of the winter solstice for the sun. Go the other direction. Let's go almost vertical. No, let's go to so right there. Okay. Even closer. Let's shadow closer. Right there. There's only a 5-degree slant on the light for the summer solstice. What that means is because we're almost at the tropic. The sun goes to the tropic and goes only a slight distance forward. The shadow doesn't work on the south side of the sun. In order to get that shadow to extend all the way across that southern stone, the gnomon would have to be over 9 feet tall. I doubt it. There is, okay, switch to the moon position. You want to go south, you want to get the line up. Good. Okay. That angle is about 53 degrees. What corresponds with 53 degrees? The position of the full moon shortly after the summer solstice. The division between the two stones appears to be between the sun and the moon. That's new. Actually, all this is relatively new in terms of our thinking and our discovery. Can you read the stones and the shadow at night? Yes, you can. The photograph on the left is a representation of the star stones with the known shadow 2 days before the full moon earlier this month. The photograph on the right was taken yesterday morning, and that is the shadow cast by half a moon. You can read this at night. This is an experiment with angled light sunlight at 53 degrees and showing what Louise demonstrated a moment ago. At 53 degrees, the shadow of the moon corresponds with the arc on the southern side, which is the moon side to 53 degrees, where the moon is in July and its full after the summer solstice. This is demonstrating the known shadow during the winter solstice at noon, when the sun is about 48.5 degrees. Reconstructed experiment, if you angle the light to that degree, that's the result you get. The result is that the Tibes astronomers evidently maintain both a solar calendar and a lunar calendar with the star stones. Both those stones are tunes for astronomical observations between and alignments between 1100 and 1200 of the current year. The North Stone is a solar calendar leading up to the point of zenith passage. At zenith passage, you can take the sunstone and put it aside, because then the shadow transitions to the moon side until it comes back to the next zenith passage, which is where that light is. So the North Stone is a solar calendar, the Southern Stone is a lunar calendar, calibrated to elevation of the full moon during the months of June and July, tracking the summer solstice. We have a couple of dates, we're shown on an earlier slide, the specific events in 1100 and 1200, in which the full moon near the summer solstice were at that angle. The star stones are physically separate but shared functionality. They have a duality of use, tempered by independent self-sufficiency. You can use them and complement each other, but their use is separate. So with a known and the shadow it casts, the star stones are a tunable astronomical instrument. How tunable? If you extend the gnomon up, it changes where the shadow falls. If you lower it, it does the same thing. The gnomon height is tuned to the size of the stones. The stones are basically a broadcast screen where the light modulated by the gnomon. In the absence of a written language, these stones were a vital demonstration device, a teaching tool, and a celestial calendar. Surely many generations of Tibes astronomers were taught standing around those stones. The stones themselves are in the museum here in the interview of the scene. Conclusion. The star stones compose a celestial calendar that supported scheduling for the core mission of Tibes, which was to host culturally important gatherings. Those gatherings were scheduled in advance. The star stones helped the schedules. The Starstones are an astronomical instrument. The stone faces were and are a projection screen. The light sources were the sun and the moon. The gnomon shadow movements across the stone markings of those stones tell a story of past and coming celestial events. They can tell you what happened in the past year, they can tell you what's about to happen this year. We are just learning how to listen to the story that those stones tell us. They have more to tell us. We'll let you know when there's more to the story, which there surely will be, because we're just beginning to understand how they work. We're just beginning to understand the complexity of astroarchaeology at Tibes. Questions? Yes?
So, if I can understand correctly, it was used as a calendar to determine winter, summer, fall, winter. Because surveying had a purpose. It's just one of the seasons. I don't know.
Did we need that to know the season?
No. To research anything other than the season. Is there a purpose for it? Rather than just saying, okay, well, different winter, summer. What else did they use it for?
Well, it would be, usually if one is a teaching device, and a society that doesn't have a written language, it's a demonstration device. And I think that it was used as a religious device because it viewed characteristics of the deities and the supernatural forces that they associate with the sun and the moon. Those are the functions that I see.
The information we got from them, did they make any decisions on it, from that information?
Will it be public?
Did they make any decisions, like agriculture, holiday?
Yes, I think in the sense of they would make decisions about when to send out notifications that a ceremony was going to take place at Tibes, because they could see through the movement of the shadow when the date that they had in mind was approaching. If I had to guess, what they would do is they would say, okay, the moon is half full now. When it's full, come to Tibes because we are now going to hold X festival. That would change every year. You would see it coming. But the moon phase would give you a window on a time period in which you could give people to show up.
What about planting the crops and things like that? Did they use it for that?
Yes, yes. That is decidedly associated with astronomy for the ATH. It's global. So they would pick a star, normally, that appears just above the horizon before sunrise, just above the horizon after sunset. It's called reliable rising or setting. They paid attention to that because it's unique to a day or 2 days, but it's right there at that moment. And they would associate that through historical knowledge and observation with the onset of the rainy season. And so when that star appeared, in advance of something that they expected and wanted, it was common for them to schedule a ceremony to propitiate the gods, saying, yes, you can see that the rainy season is about to begin, may it be a good. That is a practice of their arts in South America today.
You mentioned that these stars were used as a religious device.
That's implied because certainly in the surviving airline cultures in South America, the presence, the movement of celestial bodies is associated with origin myths what they regard as supernatural, what we regard as supernatural forces, what they regard as the key forces in the universe. So the stars are not just a calendar, they are associated with myths and stories and cultural values of the society. We do that in a diluted sense today with our use of the zodiac for personality analysis. But it is much more imbued in these cultures that we find.
Are the star zones of common use across the Arawak culture?
Here's the biggie in a sense. These are absolutely unique. The observation, how it's used, what it's used for, is a reflection of other astronomical practices that the Arawaks had and practice today. This is the Plaza Principal in miniature. It's a very specialized subset function. Not only is it unique thus far, because we're going to go back and look at where it took a long time to recognize the function of heat, but parts of this are unique here as well. That straight cut in the stone is the only object that's in recovered heat. It has that kind of precise, straight cut in stone. Great skill and care was taken to do that.
Any other ceremonial part in Puerto Rico with the same tools and instruments for celestial?
There are other ceremonial parks. Kalhana, which is nearby, is much bigger. It has very large petroglyphs and it has astronomical alignments. It does not have a starstone that we are aware of as the discovery yet. But if you're here and you have an extra half day, I would go to Kalhana. It is impressive. It's 45 minutes to here.
4,500 hours.
Yeah. Any additional? Yes, sir.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I've heard that the site was abandoned by them 1,000 years ago. And could this formula, should we say, an indication for they could predict future disaster by observing the stars?
Well, I'm sure there were shaman astronomers who, among the Arawaks, who claimed that, just as people who claim that Nostradamus could do that in our culture and modern era. But there's nothing here that indicates an ability to predict the future except to anticipate a repetition of an astronomical event that has been observed many times in the past. You can say the solstice is coming in soon. Yes. You can say that the equinox is tomorrow or the next day. But you can't say you're going to be wealthy and wise.
Thank you.
Anybody else? You have a question? You're welcome to come forward and look at these and ask direct questions. Please? Good luck. I think that we're ready.
Yes, I think, but just so you guys know, we do have a little, and guys, remember, this is all new, this is brand new, this is happening, but more things will come out of this, okay? We do have a little present for Mr. Solomon.